Hi, this is Matt with Wizco Games, and I just wanted to do a quick run through of our latest adventure, Long Was the Night, a holiday season Winter Solstice type adventure for Dungeons and Dragons for characters of 11th to 13th level, where the weather outside wasn't the only thing frightful. All right, so real quick, just to orient you on what you're looking at as the Dungeon Master, and I should caveat this entire video will contain some spoilers, so if you are a player or likely to play this, then you probably should tune out now. You can get the information certainly after you play through the adventure, watch this video, come back, take a look at maybe how I envisioned it being played. But for those dungeon masters out there, this is a video walkthrough of the entire adventure and my thoughts on what it would be like to go through this if I were running it for your group. So here on the cover you have Dedek Imraz, Dedek Mraz, or as the locals refer to him as Dada Dedek. Dada Dedek. He is the Archmage that lives on the top of the mountain just outside the city of Haverfont, probably about 8 or 9 miles away, plus up several thousand feet up in the mountaintop. He comes around every year or so, not necessarily every year, but he comes around looking for apprentices to help him with his workshop, help him with his work, and he'll in exchange train them in the ways of magic. A lot of times the apprentices that he thinks might work out don't, and they'll come back, and generally speaking, they'll come back with gifts. He'll often bring gifts for the people as well, and as we'll find, he's using these gifts that he gives to the people of Haverton, or Haverfont rather, and other towns around the mountain as a way to increase his popularity, increase almost the worship, if you will, in an attempt to gain godhood, and we'll see that here in a little bit. This is on DM's Guild and available for download right now for $5. It is themed for the holiday season, Winter Solstice time frame. Real quick look through the adventure itself. It's intended for one night, so about 4 or 5, maybe 5 hours, depending on how you run, how your players, what kind of RP your players get into. We'll talk about the background, personalities, 3 acts. So as the cold sets in the town of Haverfont, Act 2 is the travel from Haverfont to up the mountain to the workshop, and then at Dedek Emraz's house there at the top of the mountain. Concluding the adventure, we'll cover down and talk about rather some magic items and take a look at the map. For those of you interested, the artwork in here was the cover art was all Rick Hershey. If you haven't, there's a link to his website right here. If you haven't checked out his art before, he is fantastic. He's my go-to for all of my products. And then we have Dean Spencer and J.E. Shields as well. In fact, J.E. Shields is right here on the front page. Here are some links to our social media. So if you do play through this, please let us know how it went for you. Okay, and I'm not going to go through I'm not going to waste your time by reading through everything, but we will cover down on a lot of the specifics that make this adventure kind of fun, at least in my mind, and we'll see what you think. So as I mentioned, this is a 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons book. It's geared towards 11th to 13th level. If you really push it as the Dungeon Master, it will be very difficult for 11th to 13th levels. So just keep that in mind. There are some sinister creatures that we'll see here in a little bit, particularly if they end up fighting Dada Dedek himself. It'll be a significant challenge. Not impossible, but the intent was to push 11th to 13th level to their limits for sure. One thing that we do at Wizco Games in an attempt to streamline the adventures and make sure that you can get through it as close to 4 hours as possible are several things in here. As you're looking at, we have most of the stuff is hyperlinked to World Anvil. our World Anvil portal, and near the end of the video, I'll talk about where, or I'll show you rather, what that involves. We do have unique treasures that are unique to this specific adventure, but you're more than welcome, obviously, to use them in your campaign setting. I try to limit the flavor text and give you more of a feel of how things are going versus telling you explicitly what to say, but there is some in here just to get the point across. And then the maps that will be included are ready to go in virtual tabletop, any your favorite virtual tabletop like Fantasy Grounds or Roll20. One of the things, another thing that we do is kind of standardized difficulty classes or DCs, and in this book, it has both. So if, for example, you have a DC 12, it'll say challenging DC 12, just like you see right there. But if you do see in future books, if you do see well, this is a challenging roll, you'll just kind of the intent is that you'll know that that's DC 12, and that takes some of the guesswork out of what should this DC be for the particular role. Adventure hooks, you can read through those on your own, but basically the characters are probably looking at a little bit of rest and relaxation, get away from the adventuring as the winter solstice approaches. You know, the nights get longer, gets a lot colder, so they're trying to bed down for the winter in the town of Haverton. I'm sorry, Haverfont. I keep saying that. Have a bit of a background here. Uh, the town of Haverfont, as I mentioned, is one of the primary beneficiaries of the gifts that Dada Dedek likes to hand out in exchange for the apprentices that he takes up to his mountaintop. A lot of times, those apprentices don't come back, and it's not the town doesn't take it in a sinister way. It's not like they're missing or that they're gone or if they feel like they're kidnapped. It's just that the families assume, oh, we've given our son or daughter to Dada Dedek and he's taking care of them. We'll see that that's not necessarily the case as we continue on. Here in this section, we start the personalities where I cover the the big name personalities in the adventure that you kind of want to get to know and make sure that you have um, their motives down a little bit. So we start with Dedek Mraz, or Dada Dedek, as I mentioned, the townspeople call him. Here's your first link and first opportunity to go to World Anvil. And on our World Anvil portal, that's where we have a lot of interactivity. So we'll see here in a little bit that our monsters are up there, monster stats are up there that all have clickable links for rolling the dice. For example, there's a lot of ambiance music with YouTube links in there that you can use for background sounds as you're playing through the adventure. And then some additional information, and the VTT maps are also there. Additional information on the adventure, and then also the VTT maps are there. And we didn't get to it this month, but a lot of times in some of the other adventures we have the tokens as well. We probably will get those up at some point, but they're not in there just yet. We talk about Dedek Mraz's 8 wizards, his eight apprentices. That was ridiculously difficult to say for some reason. Mrs. Mraz herself, Pyotr Kuchenbach, the poor victim in this particular adventure, Rudolfi Rosa, and then Spike. And you can tell me how you think that name's pronounced, but Spike's a little gremlin that hangs around Dada Mraz all the time. We go into Act 1 where the cold sets in. The adventurers themselves are in Haverfont. It's super cold. While it hasn't been, the weather hasn't turned sour yet, it's definitely to the point that the adventurers don't really want to go outside. So they're hanging out in one of the local taverns and probably working on some brews or some spice cider or something to that effect, and really trying to warm themselves up. When poor Pyotr, who was just recently, in fact, probably a day or so before the adventurers arrived, Pyotr was taken as one of Dada Dedek's newest apprentices. Rudolfi made his appearance in town and made the selection. Pyotr was chosen, Pyotr Kuchenbach, and they left. Well, in that time period between the day that they left and they're starting their travel back up the mountain, Rudolfi, who's also kind of new to the game, he's one of Dada Dedek's newest apprentices. He's trying to tell him all this cool stuff. He's like, yeah, this is going to be great. It only hurts a little bit. Don't worry about this. And that, of course, Spike's Pyotr's fight or flight instincts. He's like, well, I don't want to go anywhere I'm gonna get hurt. He's a little 9-year-old boy, so he's thinking, any kind of pain at all is not really what he signed up for. So he's already considering running away, and lo and behold, as we'll see later on, about 3/4 of the way up the mountain, they get to uh, Dada Dedek's guard camp, where he's got several minions that are basically guarding the trail for him and keeping outsiders away from his workshop. And that's about all Piotr can handle. So that very evening, he runs from Rudolphi, gets away from him, makes his way all the way back down the mountain, stumbles into town, and that's where the adventure really picks up. There's some, as I mentioned, there's some ambiance, some town ambiance, and stuff like that we'll go over here in a minute, or look at here in a minute. But that's really how the adventure kind of kicks off. And you can see here I've got some text that I've included in here that can give you some uh, that really wintry feel to your game. If you'd like to read some of it, you don't have to, and it's certainly not a game or it doesn't make or break the adventure in any way. It just kind of gets your players into that feel of just how cold it is. So you can read through that if you'd like. So after you get through um, reading through like this is how the Act 1 is going to go, these bullet items. You can look through those to get a general idea of how it's going to go. You can see where the adventure itself is going to crescendo, and I peak, if you will, in this particular act, and then how to transition into Act 2. Once you get into the acts or the events themselves, you can see here you go through optional or required, and they're not necessarily, and it says this in the text as well, but these aren't necessarily in they are kind of in order, but they can certainly in certain circumstances they can be played out of order, just depending on how your game is going, how the players are RPing, that sort of thing. But the events in here will help you guide your players through the first act. So they're sitting in the Yosemite Inn in Haverfont. Pine nut tea, hot chocolate, or whatever they're doing to try and warm up. There's probably a little fire on the deck that they're sitting outside and that sets the stage. And I put in here that it's kind of like a ski town. Just if you've ever been or seen on TV, that kind of ski town feel where everybody's happy and go lucky, and there's snow drifts on the side of the road. And they probably plowed the road recently, and everybody's got stocking caps with little balls on top and whatever, and everybody's pretty happy until the event 2, when Piotr finally stumbles into town, and he's just been beaten down by the arduous trek all the way back. This 9-year-old boy has stumbled most of the way down the mountain, traveled probably 8 or 9 miles through the snow. He's just a wreck. And here you've got some things, some flavor text that you can talk to the as if you're the villagers, wondering what the heck happened to Piotr. And then we go on. Um, uh, what happens? What happens if they what happens if they question the boy at this point? Then is he has a couple of things to say, but he's really exhausted, he's cranky, he's hungry, he hasn't had a lot of food, so he's not very tolerant of wanting to talk to the adventurers, but he does have a couple of things that he'd be interested in saying. What Piotr doesn't know, nor do the adventurers might suspect, is that Rudolphi is terrified that he is going to fail his very first task given to him on his own by Dada Dedek. And so he has pursued Piotr and is just on the outskirts of town trying to figure out what he's going to do. So he has these in event number 3. Here we come wassailing. This is a required one. It says he comes in, uses these icebound totems that Dada Dedek has given to him to basically protect himself if there's any issues on the way up or down the mountain. And these icebounds are constructs that are shrunken down into a totem thing. So he breaks the totem and they are conjured. These huge size in D&D terms, constructs made out of ice appear in the middle of town and start wreaking havoc. They're completely indiscriminate. If somebody runs in front of them, they're going to try and squash them. If there's a building in their way, they're going to try and smash it. They're huge size, so probably 15, 18 feet tall, just smashing the stuffing out of everything in sight. And that is Rudolph's distraction. So once they start attacking, presumably the adventurers will jump to the rescue and try and stop them. Rudolphi at that point in event 4 will then try to abscond with Pyotr by force. So he's going to come in and try and take the kid and make his way back up to Dada Dedek. The adventurers might spot him. If they don't, then my thought here in this particular event with Rudolphi caught red-handed is that the villagers will approach him. Like somebody recognizes him, like, "Hey, that's Rudolphi. What's he doing back? That's weird. What did you do to my kid? Why is Pyotr saying these things?" This crowd will start gathering around him, and at some point, the adventurers, whether or not they've taken care of the Icebound or not, at some point the adventurers will notice, and they'll see what's going on. There might be a bit of a scuffle between Rudolphi and um, the adventurers, but they don't really. Rudolphi himself doesn't really have a big uh, desire to fight, particularly that many adventurers, probably 4 or 5 adventurers in the party. Once he sees the odds stacking up against him, he quickly gives up. He might throw a couple punches, but he might throw a couple spells, but he's not intending to fight to the death. But in the event that they do end up killing him, they're still way ahead. He doesn't have to be a part of the adventure if the adventurers really take him to task. From there, once we get through talking to Rudolphi and everybody really insists that somebody has to do something, and hopefully the adventurers at that point take the cue and realize that that's on their shoulders to not sit in the ski town anymore and find out what's really going on at Dada Dedek's workshop. Once they decide to do that, we go into Act 2, which is from Haverfont to the workshop. And when you're going to the workshop, when you're taking that mountain trail up to the workshop, up the mountain, there are some ambient sounds there because this winter storm blows in out of almost seemingly out of nowhere. People were expecting some snow just because it's winter and they've already had some up to this point. But this is a real, like 100-year storm that blows in, vicious, really vicious weather. And that's all from a wish from Dada Dedek. Once he sees that the jig is up, and that his cover's been blown by Rudolphi, he just conjures a storm that hopefully will deter the adventurers or anybody from traveling up the mountain. So he does that. The storm blows in. I've got some sounds, some ambient sounds there on the World Anvil portal that you can use as background noise, but just know that it's pretty brutal. So they start that off, and again, you've got your developments here, your crescendo, and then your transition to Act 3. So where that will move over. You have a little bit of an event here with the weather. As I mentioned, it's a pretty brutal storm, so they have to try and negotiate that, not take too much damage. Really, the intent here is for them to go out of their way from an RP perspective on how they're going to prep for the travel in the cold weather. If they do or if you as the DM choose that for them to get horribly lost to the point that they feel like they may not even make it, what I have in here is event number 6. Some elves from a nearby town who are used to living in the cold weather and they don't seem to be terribly affected by it. They come in, kind of save the day. They have these warm belly berries. That's fun to say 3 times fast. These warm belly berries that will help the adventurers overcome the cold and at least make it through the night. And then they'll lead them on their way to the mountain trail. Rudolphi, by the way, this whole time is not a bumbling idiot, but he is not as helpful as he believes he can be. He has been he's been up and down the mountain basically twice. Once when he got taken as an apprentice, and then this time that he has been trusted by Dada Dedek to go get another apprentice. And so he feels like he knows the way, but he ends up leading the adventurers off the reservation more than once or twice in the wrong direction. And so it's not out of the realm of possible, or it should be almost likely that the adventurers get lost unless they do some serious prep. 11th to 13th level, it's kind of up in the air sometimes because they are so powerful at that point. But as the dungeon master, this is a wish-born storm. So feel free to, the winds are so fierce that they can't fly. They don't know where they're teleporting to. They can use some divination magic maybe, but uh, if they get to the point that they're just gonna jump to Act Three, feel free to have Dada Dedek has perhaps put in some magical barriers that are preventing them from divining what's on top of the hill or what's on top of the mountain, what's in his workshop, that sort of thing. Um, then we go to event 7, which is essentially some random encounters while they're going up the mountain. Here's some of the new creatures. So we've got some giant mountain goats, ridge giant, which is sort of maybe a middle ground between a mountain and a hill giant, if you will. So these guys inhabit the forest just at the line where if you've ever looked at a mountain, you can see that pine tree line that the pine trees just suddenly end and then it's just rock up. They kind of inhabit that area of a lot of mountains. Maybe even some umber hulks or ogres and some dire wolves in there as well. And that's all goodness for them traveling up the mountain. They do, as I mentioned earlier, they finally get up to this guard post that Dada Dedek has instantiated up there, and it's run by this half giant, this brutal looking half giant named Golbernek. And Golbernek has a band of about 20 or so ogres. And Dedek has dressed them to the nine, so he's spared no expense as far as outfitting them. This Golbernek fella, this half giant, is dressed in this black, blocky plate mail armor, and the ogres have matching black blocky plate mail armor that really is pretty intimidating. Not your standard fair ogre that you're going to encounter in the forest or in a cave. They look pretty imposing, although there's plenty of room in there for a little bit of comedy as well. If you know, despite the fact that they look imposing, they're still kind of buffoons, right? They're still ogres at heart. Golbernek kind of has a good head on his shoulders, and he keeps these guys in line, but uh, they're still ogres at the end of the day. The adventurers have to make their way past Golbernek. Whether they fight their way past or whether they talk their way past, that's up to you, or I guess really up to them. But it should be a fairly interesting fight if they go up against 20 ogres plus the half giant. Once they're past him, then there's nothing barring them from, or nothing between them and the tower at the top. Um, the tower is in this particular case is the term for the tallest part of the tallest peak. That's what Mraz refers to it as, where his workshop's located. Again, developments, crescendo, and then we go into the conclusion and how you as the DM can wrap this all up. As soon as they reach the top of the hills, or the top of the mountain rather, the tower, it's super foggy. This is another effect that Mraz has put into place to try and deter the adventurers from coming in, and they can't see anything. It's thick as pea soup, as they say. What they can do, or what senses are working though, is a sense of smell. They smell chestnuts roasting, they smell a fire burning, they can hear somebody doing something, shifting around in the fog, not too far away, but they can't hardly see anything. If they go into the fog, at some point they run into Dasha, and Dasha is one of Mraz's oldest apprentices. And she's at this cooking fire in the middle of the camp. She's roasting chestnuts, of all things. And there's some potential for some conversation there. She's not necessarily hostile right off the bat. She assumes and has not been told by Dada Dedek that there's potential bad guys coming up the hill. So she's just out there doing what she would normally be doing, and there's potential for some conversation there until the adventurers either start banging their shields or whatever they're going to do. And then at some point she finally she's a pretty wise old woman. She's not going to be clueless for too long. So she eventually tries to raise the alarm. At that point, there's two. I've got a round by round here. If you'd like to use it, that's just my suggestion on how it might work. But she yells the alert. Two of the nearest apprentices, Danth and Pran, two halfling wizards that are twins that live in the area. They come to assist, and they aren't sure what's going on, so they mostly will go on the defensive, hold person, grease, that sort of thing. They'll do spells that are going to not necessarily kill these people that are at the top of the hill because they don't know what they're here for necessarily, but they're definitely going to run to Dasha's to help Dasha. Um, and then we'll see here in a minute, there's another building which is the actual workshop. That's where the stuff is made for the most part. And that's called the Green Stuff. And in this case, a little inside my family, we have this dish. It's a terrible dish. I hate it. But we call it the Green Stuff. And I won't go into too much detail, but it's the two main ingredients are green jello mix and cottage cheese. And so even from there, I'm assuming you can probably imagine just how terrible it is. But it's called the Green Stuff, and that's what this particular encounter is called, is the Green Stuff. This is where all the stuff is made. In here are two more apprentices, or former apprentices, now turned Slad, Comics and Cupede. Both of those are I say recently, probably the last 10 or a dozen years, been turned into Slad by Mraz. They were apprentices that he pulled from one of the towns around the mountain. And with his pact, with Dada Dedek's pact with Norsara the Many, which is a powerful elder Slad on the plane of Limbo, with that pact, he has learned how to make his apprentices more powerful and thus make more of these gifts, of these objects that he is using to further, or hopefully, attain godhood that he's so desperately seeking. So they encounter two of these Slad here. It's probably going to be a pretty difficult fight. The key to this is not necessarily fighting them, but to get them to a point that they'll run off. They're not necessarily looking to die either. At some point they'll use their plane shift abilities, or even just run, because while they are Death Slad and Gray Slad, they're not, like, their heart's not necessarily in it. They are still at heart, at least currently, their mental capacity is still that of the apprentices that worked for Dada Dedek. So they'll put up a pretty good fight, and it's not to say that they'll just roll over, but it's not necessarily as bad as it could be in the event that they were fighting a true Death Slad. Give it all you got, though. If they are rolling these guys over, as 13th level characters certainly could, then they will fight to the last opportunity to flee, and certainly give them a run for their money. There's another building we'll see on the map here in a minute, where those who have failed to make apprentice but still show a little spark of magic, those end up in this little cabin, and it's basically a ramshackle building with hay for a flooring that they change out fairly regularly. I mean, cattle, like they treat them like cattle and horses. And essentially what's happening here is that, and this is probably where the adventurers it'll really dawn on them that they're dealing with a pretty sick individual. As I mentioned at the first part of this, a lot of times the apprentices will come back. So sometimes they'll make the would-be apprentices, the children, will come back, and they weren't selected to be an apprentice. But often, they will not come back. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they hold a magic spark enough to become a magic user or a wizard under his tutelage. Sometimes they just have that innate magic ability. Maybe they're a warlock. They don't even know that they can do stuff. They're a sorcerer, for that matter. They don't even know they can cast spells, or would be able to cast spells in the future. But they still have that spark that Dada Dedek is looking for, and so he'll keep them in this pen. And then when he's looking to prolong his life, he will literally suck the soul out of these children to retain his youth. So a pretty sick, chaotic individual that we find out now at this point. We also find out that good old Dada Dedek is actually a lich, and that was probably a giveaway on the cover. If you saw back here at the cover here, kind of had that hidden image there, not hidden, not so hidden image. But Dada Dedek is in fact a lich who is uh, sucking the life out of these children to keep himself looking youthful. Youthful. So the cat's out of the bag at this point. He's definitely a bad guy if they didn't already realize that. And then finally on to the final confrontation with Dada Dedek in his home, which is also right there in the compound. The feel at this point, there is some music I have again on the World Anvil page that kind of gives you a feel for the dark and foreboding tone of this, but it's kind of meant to be a dark humor. So there's obviously some tongue in cheek throughout the entire adventure as to play on a lot of the holiday themes. So it should kind of feel like that to them. You know, jingle bells off in the distance. There should be some music playing. Perhaps they don't even know where the source is. And Dada Dedek himself, when they finally run into him, is super cheerful. He's just off, annoyingly cheerful. So there's some room for some conversation in here. But he's also not foolish. So he's been around for several hundred years. He's not about to let these kooky kids foil his plans. So while he is talking with them, he's also using his lair ability. We'll see here in his stats in a second to conjure or to summon some of his remaining apprentices to his side to basically stack the deck against the adventurers. So that's what I was kind of saying here at the very beginning, is that it's not going to be necessarily an easy fight. The sorcerer, or sorry, the three of the apprentices, three of the remaining ones, Vexen, Bloodstone, and Dondera, are not super tough, but they're eighth or ninth level. If they have the ability to act, they're potentially put some hurt on the adventurers for sure. So they're not going to be pushovers either. But with these stats, they're not going to last long against 11th to 13th level dudes either. We also find out at that point Mrs. Mraz, who comes out probably with a plate full of cookies, looking all cheerful, and again back to that theme of holiday cheer and jingle bells, is actually a corrupt Leland that has been in the service of Mraz for many years as a sort of and is sort of a spy for Norsar, the Elder Slad we discussed earlier. In the end, the intent is not to kill Mraz in this one. The adventurers may go through everybody else, but the intent is that Mraz, one way or another, makes it away. So he either uses a teleport or a plane shift or something to that effect. It's your choice, or he has a contingency spell enacted on him so that if he does actually get to 0 hit points, which is quite possible, I mean, they could certainly unload on him and take him down in one round. He actually his body teleports to a nearby mountaintop, and a ring of regeneration slowly brings him back to life. He's also, as I mentioned, a lich. So if they dispel magic, if they do something that will prevent that effect, then his phylactery is also located on a different mountaintop, and he will appear there. That is your third tertiary Hail Mary option, is that he'll just appear back where the phylactery is not at all located here on the workshop location. The intent is for him to get away for future adventures so they can track him down maybe next season, next Winter Solstice. Okay, then we have a substantial horde of magic items. This is what I envisioned a four or five party of adventurers might want to go through. So these are some standard magic items plus a big amount of loot that he's been collecting over the years. And then here, I'm not going to go over them specifically. You can look at them in the book. But then here we have some of the magic items that are included in this adventure. Some of the unique magic items that are included in this adventure, including a sleigh of flying. Surprise, surprise. Return home. Everybody's grateful. They all cheer. Piotr's happy that there's a conclusion. Rudolphi will actually come back with them. Hopefully he's not dead. If he is dead, then obviously that won't happen. But Rudolphi is been redeemed, or at least considers himself redeemed, and is happy that the adventurers were able to bring this uh, evil to light. Okay, so that's the adventure, and that's kind of the look and feel of how I envision playing through it. I'm not going to go over all these magic items necessarily, but you can see there's a belt of shrinking, gingerbread figurine of wondrous power, eggnog, which is a potion, jingle bells of jarring, the lute of the winter solstice for the bard in your party, mistletoe of charming, and sleigh of flying, and then stockings of storing, and then those warm belly berries that we talked about earlier. Okay, real quick, here are a couple of stats on Dada Dedek. He is a lich, a full up lich. He does have some different abilities than your standard lich, and I've changed up his spells outside of the normal um, player's handbook. Or, I'm sorry, monster manual lich. So I've changed up some of his spells. And then, as I mentioned here, he's got a lair action where he's going to summon his allies as long as he's on his workshop grounds. And he's got a mirthful gaze, which is a little bit different than the standard lich ability. But he does still have some legendary actions. He should prove pretty tough, um, but he's not necessarily um, uh, overwhelming for 11th to 13th level party, despite this massive challenge rating. Okay, so as mentioned before, we have our World Anvil links, and if you notice, you can go in here to a lot of these. A lot of these are linked directly. So if you click on Vexen, that'll go to the apprentices on this adventure. Link on our World Anvil portal, and you can see Vexen's stats down here. The one thing I'm frustrated with on World Anvil is that I can't direct link. I can't do a hashtag link direct to the one of these items. So that's a little frustrating, but we're working on it. And if I can get it figured out, I will change it and update this module. But yeah, so here's all the apprentices. We'll go through here real quick. Here's the main page. So here's your map of Dada Dedek's workshop that is also in the adventure down here. So here's the player's map, and then your map. So you can see there's the little hovel shack where the kids live. This is a storage unit. Here's the green stuff encounter. This is where chestnuts are roasting, and here's his workshop itself. Here's the map. This is in full size. In fact, I want to say it's 10 or 12 megs. It's a big photo, so you can, or big picture, so you can blow it up. You should be able to blow it up pretty good. And that download is off of the website, so that's off of the World Anvil portal. Right here. So when you click on this, and then you get the view full size, you can see that it's pretty big. Won't let me zoom in, but it's a big photo. You can zoom all the way in to see everything you need to on that one. Okay, last little bit. So sounds and ambiance. I talked about that quite a bit. Here's some of the links of the Winter Storm and your attack with Golberneck, and then background music as they're in the workshop, and the epic final battle with some Christmas music there. It's all linked. Wandering monster table. Here's the table again. You can roll your D100. I don't know if you can see. Yep, you can see that. So 72 would have encountered some ogres. There's Bulette, Direwolf, giant goats, icebound information on those dudes that Rudolphi used, etc. Here's the compendium. So anything we missed. There's Golberneck. He's a big bad dude. And then I think that's it. You can go here to download. Yeah, there's the download link for the map. And then here on the front page, if you want to go back to the DM's Guild link, there's that link there. So that was Long Was the Night for Adventures of 11th to 13th level, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragon adventure for this holiday season. Winter Solstice specific. It's on DM's Guild right now. I appreciate you taking the time to tune in, and hopefully you watch through this whole video if you're the DM and get a feel for how I would play it. Take care, and I appreciate your support, and you can find us at wizcode.games, https://wizcode.games. Thanks. Have a great one.
La 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 la.